All right, great. Thank you. Good morning. All right, we'll get started here. Talk a little bit about some of the developments at SDSC in bringing a whole set of platforms and services for protected data. So, quick background, set the context up, talk about, I think we're all familiar with the challenges of sensitive data and some of the new regulatory requirements, how various solutions at SDSC are trying to address these challenges, and then look at some opportunities that we have started with one of the RENs out of North Carolina and bringing these services to the communities they serve, and just summarize it towards the end. So Frank and I will tag team. I'll cover most of it, but I'll let him start with the introduction.
Okay, so I'm here to give you a little bit of an overview of what SDSC actually is and how we think of ourselves. And it starts with what's our scope and expertise. We're a supercomputer center, but if you actually ask me what fraction of the staff works in supercomputing, yeah, it's maybe 20, 30%. The rest works on all kinds of other things. In particular, so there is, of course, the computing systems and infrastructure part. That's where the supercomputers sit. But then there is a large set of activities in turning bytes into knowledge. And turning bytes into knowledge literally covers everything from metadata catalogs to knowledge systems and da-da-da-da. It's a wide range of activities. Then we have the entire accelerating science through training applications and user support that is ultimately in support of both of the other two. Both the systems, but also the turning bytes into knowledge have aspects that involve training. And so we do all kinds of training activities. We do traditional user support, et cetera, et cetera. And then there is an area that is sort of, has a little bit of a different bend. It's all focused around translating research into impact, especially societal impact. This is where we think of, this is where the wildfire program is at home. If you saw the talk by Ilkay on Monday, pretty much everything she talked about is in that area in one way or the other. And finally, there is what I like to call immersive virtual environments for science. It's where we do things in order to enable people who don't know what to do with a Unix prompt to actually still do science with computers. And so you can think of this as it starts with portals that just give you access to high-performance computing, and it ends with entire environments with data, where you can publish data, where you can get DOIs, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very wide range. And if you think of the future, if people are familiar with Ready Player One for science, this is the aspiration where this is heading. Next slide. And then I'm a physicist, so I look at SDSC by the numbers. And I thought we'd give you a little bit of what that is. And I want to focus on a few numbers. There's 319 employees and volunteers when we counted for this slide. It's about 250 people that are actually full-time staff. And then there is about 70 people or so that are volunteers. They're basically not paid by us, but they are work with the people in the center. And then the other number of relevance is we teach courses online, and they've been attended by 32,000 students within the last year. And that's a non-negligible amount and it happens via Coursera. And then if you go to the bottom part, 220,000 CPU cores, 4,000 GPU accelerators, and 84 plus petabytes of storage. It sort of gives you some hardware specs that puts things in perspective. And I'll hand it over, I think, to.
Great, thanks, Frank. So one of the divisions, one of the areas that Frank talked about in his earlier slide, is a service that focuses on building secure environments. So SDSC has been working in this space since 2009, having gotten its start in building secure environments for dealing with FSMA data, FSMA requirements in support of Centers for Medicare, Medicaid Services when we built the first academic focused, built by academia, data platform to look into fraud, waste, and abuse in the Medicaid program. And so that's how our journey in this space started. And at that time, at the same time, we saw there was a lot of momentum and need for other organizations asking for similar environments to host their data. This was for healthcare information, research grants, getting HIPAA data, all types of regulatory information. So with that came along, the start of the Sherlock capability, and it's grown over the years. It's a fully managed service. We support primarily focused on higher ed research, but also work with industry partners, and then have continued to expand into the public cloud. More recently, in the last couple of years, dealing with DoD requirements around CMMC, CUI, so I'll get into that a little bit more. But I wanted to start with just kind of talking about the types of use cases. So here's an example of a researcher we've been working with the last couple of years, and it really hits on everything we at SDSC support, especially from a data and compliance standpoint. So the group of researchers here, led by the PI Louis Laurent, they are studying the risks of pregnancy in women. And all of us who've been parents kind of know, it feels like childbirth is anyway a miracle, but turns out there's a lot more risk in pregnancy, and the risk is even higher for the baby. And so that's what they're studying, but it kind of points to, from their perspective, as they're collecting data, there's a data challenge around bringing data from multiple sources, electronic health records, wearables, monitoring systems. So you're talking about really a wide variety of data that they want to integrate in a secure environment. Talk about security, right? This is PHI, genomics. So a lot of the HIPAA requirements come into play. In the last year or so, NIH has mandated certain higher security requirement for genomics data. So now those requirements are coming down for any organization wanting to do work with genomics data. They have to meet a certain security standard. Again, complex data sets, you need powerful computing, just potentially GPUs and other types of HPC systems for this type of analysis. And all of this really happening in real time. How do you bring it all in an environment, calculate, give the power it needs, get the data synthesized, organized, and turn around? So it really touches on everything that we think of from a cyber infrastructure standpoint. On the other side, there are all these attacks that happen, right? I mean, there is universities, higher ed, medical centers are all a target. There is also recent concern around False Claims Act, whistleblowers in organizations coming out and saying that organizations say they are meeting the requirements, but not necessarily. And then obviously, this was the whole Stryker announcement was in the news recently, and it's interesting that this all happened just when UCSD has been enforcing the use of Intune for device management. So you're kind of trying to get these systems for adoption while also dealing with these challenges. So obviously, it goes without saying, organizations are overwhelmed by these requirements, right? The regulatory data requirements bring a certain level of cyber security maturity that organizations that have been running open compute systems, open data systems aren't used to. And it requires a certain knowledge, a certain expertise. And if you don't have this as part of your organizational mission, it's a distraction, right? I mean, we've been in this space, we've built a team. It takes people who understand the NIST frameworks, what compliance means, how does it map to technical controls and security controls and physical security and all of that. And so you've got to have a team of experts who understand this, who will help you protect your assets from all these potential issues. And so the alternatives are You either build it yourself, which is time intensive, expensive. You've got to build that team, you've got to build that knowledge, and you should have enough business to sustain it, whether that's on campus or your partnerships, or you find a sponsor who's willing to fund it. Or you can use a typical managed service provider, which certainly there are options out there. But I mean, we coming from higher ed and academia, we know RPIs and researchers, they all build unicorns. That's how we like to say. And I think we have to be mindful of how to help them build and serve their needs. So the one size fits all approach doesn't necessarily work for them. And so, I think these challenges are there. And what if there was an option to kind of, have an organization that really is in the middle of this and understands this? So kind of where SDSC has tried to position itself is be the one-stop shop to bring all of these capabilities, whether that's research workflows, dealing with simpler needs like secure desktops, application hosting, data hosting for smaller projects, all the way to bringing in some of our HPC systems into compliance to meet the NIH requirement, to meet the HIPAA requirement down the road. And then also bring in some of our other large storage types of services within this foray. So I think the idea is, how can we be the one place that not only offers this for the UC, State of California, Cenic members, higher ed in general. So that's kind of, I think, where things are headed as we think about this. And what the value it brings is really one-stop shop. Like I said, it's compliant ready. We are taking the ownership of going through the assessments, making sure the controls are met. Whether you want a cloud-based solution or an on-prem solution, there is definitely all of those offerings as part of the larger setup. So it kind of gives you that flexibility. And we become an extension of the team that's running this, that a partner organization that we work with. Whether that's research, IT, campus IT, whoever we end up working with, we become an extension in a way of being able to directly work with researchers with very no oversight. And so, that's another benefit. And then, we deal with all the compliance. We obviously ensure that the data is protected. And again, being part of academia, we come from the same mindset of, yes, we can be PIs, we can be co-PIs. We know what it takes to meet researchers' unique needs. So bringing all that to the table now, in terms of what these services include, when you think about compliance, you think about a whole set of requirements within NIST. There's a lot to digest there, but really, if you think about the key tenets, it's having certain system-level services that ensure you have the right access control, you have protection on the boundary, you have encryption at rest, you have backup of your data to deal with ransomware and other things like that. You have monitoring, whole set of security services. There's a whole list of things that I think people are familiar with who live in IT and security. And then there are other services around compliance and auditing to ensure that you are going through the assessments, you are doing what you said you'll be doing, you have the documentation in place. We all know that it's hard to avoid breaches. Breaches can happen every time, anytime. But I think what's important to demonstrate is that you were making an effort, you were doing what you said you were doing all along as part of your the claims. And then bringing in personnel services in terms of ensuring that staff are trained, background checked, and all of that to ensure that, and so this is all that happens in the background. PIs and researchers who engage with us don't necessarily see this because they are just focused on their workloads, but a lot of these activities happen in the background. Point out that we work with a number of institutions. We work with other higher ed entities within the country, within UC. Also started working more recently with the REN over in North Carolina, and I'll mention that a little bit more. Just to again highlight some use cases, we see a whole range of use cases. We deal with organizations that are in the medical device space, bringing in data from their instruments, from the monitoring devices they may be running in hospitals, streaming that data into the environment, creating data reports and alerts based on that, so they can immediately respond in real time to the staff that may be assisting with patient care. We support organizations that are working with cohorts of population tracking, over a longitudinal study over a long time. In one case with California Teacher Study, it's a group of teachers, 20 plus years of tracking kind of their health and their progress. Another study, that the Framingham Heart Study, which is the biggest heart study in the country, over kind of in the Northeast Boston area, to dealing with the risk in an organization. UC is a very large entity, so it deals with a lot of risk. And so they bring data in from campuses, from insurance, from claims. And so all of that kind of in one location. And so we get to see a whole variety of use cases, which kind of helps us figure out different modes of supporting these different use cases. So just to focus on some of the services, kind of the main flagship service, again, Sherlock runs in AWS. There we meet most of our healthcare workloads. We deal with things like FISMA, student data. We can also support CUI there. This is primarily in AWS. We have depth and breadth of knowledge in that space. We obviously at the UC also have a very strong partnership with AWS in terms of the discounts and all we get. But this is where I think we see most of our variety of use cases, all the way from smaller workloads to building big, large data platforms. More recently, as of last year, we've also introduced another solution that focuses on the CMMC level 2, which is if you're working with the Department of Defense, they are pushing down a requirement called the CMMC, which is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, across their entire defense industrial base. So if you have to work with the DoD in the future, it's going to be enforcing the CMMC requirement. And so this is in partnership with UCSD campus, and we've built out an enclave that runs across Azure Government. It has an Office 365 GCC High, which lets you exchange controlled unclassified information with the government through the Office suite of tools. And it also has an on-prem setup for more targeted workloads like large data collections and GPUs potentially in the future. And then we also have services in the data space. We're coming across a lot of use cases where organizations want to pull in data from different resources, different systems they may have. They want to build a lake or a lake house of sorts and be able to do different types of analysis, create aggregated reports, do deeper analysis with AI and machine learning, as well as do a bunch of classic analysis, data mining, SAS, those kind of tools. And so we've built a number of solutions in that space. I'll let Frank speak to the TSCC, which is one of the more newer services coming on board.
Yeah, we've for decades almost run a campus cluster for the University of California, San Diego. And it's run as a normal condo cluster, like many other institutions. And we found then ourselves in the situation that the NIH changed the rules for human genome data, in the sense that if you want download privileges from any of the regulated data repositories in the NIH, then you have to have a NIST compliant, a NIST 800-171 compliant infrastructure that you download that into. Now, for UCSD, that the main customer, the largest customer of our campus infrastructure was a human genome researcher. And so his entire multi-million-dollar investment that he made into the campus cluster was going to be basically useless to him because suddenly the NIH required that all the data that he downloaded from the NIH on the human genome required NIST standard. And so we bit the bullet and decided, okay, fine, we're going to take the campus cluster and make it dual. So the campus cluster now serves both the open community, and they got a little bit more security for free without changing the way they operate. So there is a community that uses the hardware that is not NIST compliant and not working to NIST standards, and the regulated community, and that's the human genome people, and then that opens up for all kinds of other NIH downloads of other data, not just genomics. And in order to, and then if you then ask yourself, how do you make something like this financially viable for UCSD? The only way that you make it financially viable, like everything else in IT to first order, you have to scale it up. And so we're now making that infrastructure available to others to buy into. So we're expanding from having a campus condo to having a campus plus plus condo. And so the first, and particularly for the compliancy. So the first two customers from outside of UCSD that have spoken up and want to join is the Flatiron Institute from New York. This is part of the Simons Foundation. They typically have 90-some% of everything they do is open, but they have a couple of people who actually do research that is also hit by the NIST requirements. Again, people who download from the NIH. And so rather than them spending all of the funding and effort to build up their own infrastructure, they decided to just buy into ours. They literally bought a GPU node or a couple of GPU nodes, send them our way, we put it into our condo cluster, and now they're going to be benefiting from the NIST requirements. And the second organization that bought into this is actually just down walking distance from UCSD. Sanford Burnham Prebys also is a life sciences research institute, and they also, rather than building it up themselves, decided let's just buy into yours. And so this is now available as an infrastructure for other people to buy into. It's a condo infrastructure, works according to condo model, and off you go. If this is of interest to some of you, the contact email is right there. And now, where we're going with this in the future. And as anybody in this room who is running a condo system for their campus understands, these systems become financially viable only if you increase them to a scale where you can amortize to a price that the faculty are willing to pay. Right? That's the cardinal problem. And if you ask yourself, how do you do this in the regulated data space? The NIST 800-171 space is relatively small, at least on our campus, because it only covers a slither of the NIH, the part of the NIH that suddenly changed requirements that regular data requires NIST. A much larger health sciences part is everybody that requires HIPAA. So our next goal is to take the infrastructure that you just saw on the previous slide and make that infrastructure not just NIST compliant, but work towards HIPAA compliance. At that point, we then have high-performance computing, AI computing on-prem, where it is a little more affordable than in the cloud, and do this for health sciences broadly. And given that the impact of AI on health sciences is large, at least at our campus, the hospitals are very eager to translate AI tools, AI methods into clinical practice. This is where we're going with that infrastructure. And I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Mike. So, how are we looking at this capability in terms of helping and partnering with other organizations. So, a lot goes in, obviously, in building some of these enclaves like we did for CMMC. It was a 5-year effort in terms of preparing, building an environment, the documentation, the getting ready for the assessment. CMMC, even though is a much smaller set of controls compared to something like FISMA, but it's very black and white. And so, and it was very new, so we didn't really know what to expect going into these assessments. So now that we've gone through, I think, we understand that it's a lot of effort for universities to take on, especially if their portfolio of DoD work may not be that big, right? That they don't want to have a multi-year investment. So can we bring something which has shared infrastructure and economies of scale? Well, that's how we are positioning this is, the services we've built, we will bring to other organizations through an inheritance model. And what that allows them to do is really inherit everything that we've built, the enclave, the services, the documentation, and all of that, create a handful of policies and security plan that captures their local context, but really 90 to 95% reliance on us as a service provider. And so that minimizes their scope. And then they go through their assessment, and then we partner with them on that assessment. So, it's a joint assessment in some sense. And then once they're certified, then their researchers are good to work with the DoD. They use our services, and they have the role. It's a shared responsibility. But again, it's a responsibility where the heavy lifting is done by us as a service provider, with very minimal requirements on the partner institution side. So that's the approach we are taking. And we've tried to also, from a REN perspective, try to kind of do a different model where we partnered last year with MCNC, which is a REN based out of North Carolina. And the goal is that they get to immediately make our services available to all the stakeholders they serve, their entire community of universities, K through 12, state institutions, Department of Ed, libraries, all of it, right? So now the whole suite of tools that we've built at SDSC in this space, in data and compliance, is available to stakeholders that MCNC serves. In parallel, we will duplicate this capability for them over the next 2 to 4, 5 years. And so the goal is you rent now with the intent to build. And so turnkey solutions available today, and then in time, we will recreate what we've done over the years in Sherlock, the whole set of services in North Carolina under their administrative umbrella. And so they will then have their own services. Hopefully we create network of such services that are available for institutions to use, and then they can expand that, and it gives us kind of another site to be able to serve our customers, and same's true for them. And so it kind of shows a snapshot of here are all the services MCNC's portfolio consists of that they've been doing over the years: collaboration, consulting, cyber, data center, the communities they serve. Well, they went from June 2025 to July 2025 and just added a whole set of services in the cloud and data space, right? Just by getting into this agreement, bringing these services that if they had to build on their own, they would have to build a team, hire the experts, make the investment, capital investments, and all of that. Instead, they basically just bought a white glove service that we are able to offer, while we also build capabilities for them in parallel. So where I think we are trying to move this is establishing these MOUs with institutions and partnering with organizations at the institutional level to say, let's set up an agreement, an MOU that lets you point all your researchers to us. And through that, they get access to all the services we build and operate. And so we'll be able to bring them, connect them to the right people, at the different groups that we have. And that MOU includes support for a certain number of projects. And as that footprint goes, as the adoption grows, those MOUs can change over time and can increase. But it really gives them the ability to start small, not knowing how their growth with the research grants they're pursuing in DoD and health may increase or decrease over time. And so it's a model that's worked for a number of institutions we partnered with. We've been able to get them going and kind of be this extension I was talking about. So just kind of summarizing all of this, I think compliance is expensive. We've been in that space, we've gone through that journey for more than 15 years. And unless organizations really have the necessary funding and the runway to build this, they should really consider buy over build or rent to build models, right? So you start, you figure out, and if there is growth on your end, then you could certainly consider kind of building these capabilities within their institutions. We hear about other agencies adopting similar standards. NIH, like we mentioned, for genomics. I think at UCSD we are seeing NASA grants also adopting the NIST framework. We see NSF grants requiring either FISMA in some cases or pointing to various NIST frameworks. So organizations are scrambling, and if they are not responsive, this could mean loss of funding. The NIH thing has a deadline. Researchers were scrambling to meet this. Fortunately, at UCSD, we had some of these capabilities, so we were able to quickly turn around and make those PIs compliant so they could continue their work and get the data sets they needed for their research, and those grants continued. And again, I think we are, in the higher ed in general, is going through a shift in funding and in everything that's happening. And so I think the value of shared services goes up, and entities like Cenic play an important role in figuring out how do these services get to the types of organizations that may not be looking to build this on their own, but certainly have a need. And so I think that the rents play an important role there. And I think as is evident from kind of what we've been talking about, SDSC is really in this data, cyber, AI, HPC space, and we feel like we have the right capabilities and resources to really position ourselves to impact that space. But there's also a lot of unknowns. Frank's talked about inference, and I think from a cyber perspective, we don't know what kind of threat actors are out there that we have to plan for, especially as adoption of AI across the vendors we work with, across the tooling we use, kind of takes off. So just some things at the top of our mind. So that was what we wanted to cover. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank.
Happy to take questions, comments.
Yeah, we have some time for questions. I'll kick it off. So at UC Santa Cruz, this is something we have struggled with mightily. And you can imagine even less resourced institutions struggling even more, or just maybe putting this in a compartment and not even looking at it because it's just too much. Pretty consistently, I would say every 3 to 6 months, someone in my organization comes to me and they say, where's our compliant infrastructure? Where do we do regulated research? In fact, just this morning, I did a review for Army Corps of Engineer project, and I had to attest that we did this and we didn't do that as far as DFARS went. What would be your first piece of advice to someone in my position about where do we go from recognizing the need, hearing the demand signal from the faculty and from the Office of Research, and providing a solution? Let me give you one more data point, and that is I put together a CMMC level 2 compliant infrastructure just a bid, build of materials, and this was last year before prices went crazy. And just for the most basic kind of, 500 core cluster, it was $700,000. So given that and the need and everything else, what's your piece of advice to somebody like me and others in the audience about where we should go from here?
Yeah, certainly we've gone through that journey at UCSD, right? And so two things. One was it did take a lot of effort at the campus level in terms of pulling in the right stakeholders. That was the investment UCSD made, bringing in folks from Office of Information Assurance, folks from contracts and grants, export control, right? And the support from CIO and the Chancellor and Frank and others to really getting this program going. That was bringing everyone together at the table. Then we built the capability, which was building the services, building the platform, which was again a joint partnership between us as the enclave providers and Office of Information Assurance that works with the labs closely. Because the labs need hand-holding in terms of the intake process to say, go use the enclave, but here are some other responsibilities. I think having gone through that journey, now we have a very clear recipe of how it works because we have the certification, because we have a service. So I think my comment to your question would be knowing a service provider that you can point your researchers to, that understands this capability really well, but at the same time having someone on your campus side who can be that coordinator, so it's not just handing it off to someone and they're lost. Like really having someone with that ownership at the campus level to say, okay, let's take you through the process, but we will hand you to a partner and we'll be involved so that there is that oversight and presence.
Yeah, maybe it's sort of like the Access Campus Champion model.
Correct. Exactly.
And the way that I think about this is you have to ask yourself two questions. What's the scale that you think is realistic that your campus has? And does that scale warrant you building it out? And that is a very hard-nosed business decision because it costs money. And in order to sustain it, it costs money every single year. And the second question is, how soon do you need it? And do you have the time to build it yourself? Or do you need a scenario where you first back into somebody who's already built it and then follow over time as you are more basically hedging? You're doing risk hedging. You're building with somebody that already has done this and rent, buy, whatever you want to call it, and then buy yourself time to delay a decision whether you actually build it yourself. And those are the two questions that I would ask myself. And being somebody who struggles constantly in supporting things at a price that the researchers at my campus are willing to pay.
Yeah.
And that is the cardinal challenge. None of the technical crap. That's all easy. It's the cardinal challenge is the business model of providing a price that people are willing to pay.
Well, I have to be completely honest with you here. I was very glad to see that $700,000 quote come back because I knew that was far beyond anything anyone would ever support, and it let me sort of kick the can down the road a little bit. Let's have a side channel conversation about how we might address those needs. I think,
Sure.
and stand up, build a demand signal that's aggregate so that we're not all on here on our own.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions from the audience? Nobody wants to tread on this topic. I know it's fraught for sure. Well, in that case, let's thank our speakers and move to the next session.